Welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, where we interview remarkable people and share strategies for mastering money and living a meaningful life. With your host, Grant Sabatier, creator of Millennial Money and author of Financial Freedom, a proven path to all the money you will ever need.
This episode is sponsored by Capital, the savings and investing app that I'll tell you more about in the middle of this episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm very excited this morning to have a wonderful friend of mine, a guy now that I've known for a couple of years, and we always go deep in our conversations. Doc G from Diverse FI and from the Earn and Invest podcast. Over the past couple of years, Doc G has emerged as a leading voice within the FIRE movement, and more specifically within the mindset and mindfulness subsection of the FIRE movement, and wanted to bring him on the show today to talk about an important, maybe the most important topic in a lot of cases, death and what it means to build a life that you love. We don't spend a lot of time talking about dying and the process of dying. And Doc G, in his full-time and now part-time life, worked in hospice care and was very close to the end of life and end of life care. And so I wanted to bring him on the show to really not talk about money much at all, probably, but dig into this topic, because I believe in memento mori, which is the simple idea of talking about death and bringing death into your everyday life as a way to appreciate life and feel fully alive. That's something I practice in my own life and wanted to share that with all of you. And the last thing I want to say, I just want to thank everyone for all the emails the past couple of months as the show's grown around the world. And I appreciate you appreciating what I'm doing. So thank you for all of the thank yous. And Doc G, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here. I love this idea of memento mori because my professional life, I deal with death every day, every moment, because I work in hospice. And yet in my financial life, where I produce content and do a podcast, we don't talk about it as much. So it's kind of interesting to intermix them because I think there's such a connection of understanding one and understanding the other.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between sort of Eastern and Western cultures. You know, growing up in the West, death is something, I had many, multiple of my grandparents and great-grandparents and eventually a couple of friends die. And death is reserved as this sort of like very extremely fearful thing that you don't want to talk about and don't want to think about. And in the Eastern philosophies, religions, culture, death is something that's very present in everyday life. And in, Tibetan Buddhism specifically, amongst other sects, there's this idea every day of bringing forth in your meditation, a meditation on death and the fragility of being and suffering. So my first question for you is, why do you think there's so much apprehension in the West or in the FIRE community, just in general, to talking about death?
I think a lot of it has to do with exposure. Before I was a physician, and even when I was going through my training, the idea of death scared me too. And it was something that we all are going to face, and yet so many of us fear. But I was never exposed to it until I got into the practice of medicine. And as I practiced medicine for a long time and then did hospice, which is not just dealing with the moment of death, but walking with people through the buildup of this is coming and how we prepare for it, I became more familiar with it. And one of the things that surprises people is I no longer fear death, which I certainly did when I started this journey. And the reason why is I've been exposed to so much of it. And as opposed to seeing it as something fearful or scary, I actually now see it much more as a culmination of a life, which is something to celebrate. And hopefully, if it's a life well lived, or at least if that person can come to some conclusion with their bigger issues by the time they get to that deathbed, it can be somewhat of a beautiful thing. So it was only through repeated exposure, when it became part of my normal daily habits and rituals, did it become comfortable. And for most of us, we avoid talking about, thinking about, or being exposed to death up until we are forced, right? So we stay away from it until a family member or a friend is going through the process. And then we limit it to these scary experiences like walking into a hospital ICU. Whereas if you look around the world, especially at some Eastern cultures and some cultures which are not as medicalized, you will see that people have much of a different relationship with death, that they are there at the bedside with family members, maybe in their home with a grandparent who lived with them forever and are present for their death. And so it becomes much more a part of their daily life. You know, you think of like Dia de los Muertos, right? So in some cultures, they celebrate death even after someone's passed. And by doing this, it becomes a much more normal, comfortable thing. And we just don't do that here in the United States.
So one of the things, we're clearly dying from the day that we were born. As we're getting older, our bodies are deteriorating with different speeds and rates, and based on so many different factors. It's something that's clearly present in all of our lives, but we often tend to run away from change or try to deny it in a way. What you're saying is that this repeated exposure has made you somewhat more mindful, even not somewhat, just more mindful and more aware that it's part of the natural progression. And I read something recently that really stuck with me, where you think about someone looking down on this planet and a human life, and this idea that every season, there's a new crop of birds, or just like every generation, there's a new sort of crop of humans in this sense, and it's such a part of a natural cycle. It's really kind of all the same thing in that sense. And my question for you would be, working in hospice now, you mentioned regrets a little bit, but what kind of conversations are you having conversations with people at the end of their life and helping them reflect back on their life? Can you talk about what does that look like in a hospice setting?
Life reflection actually is incredibly important in hospice care. And it's just as important as, for instance, pain medication or social work. Life reflection is so important because it helps ease the pain of this fearful thing that they're facing. Let me back up for a second and go back to the fear aspect. I really don't think people fear death itself. Yes, they do, because they can't visualize it because they don't see it. But I think what death really is it's a fear of not achieving that which is important to you, or not being who you want to be. So when we think about death, it scares us because that's a finite end. And especially if you're looking at your life now and saying, I haven't done what I wanted to do. I haven't achieved what I wanted to achieve. I haven't made those relationships I wanted to make. This idea that there's a finite end and you may not reach those goals scares the heck out of us. So that ties in a lot to life reflection, because a big part of helping people eventually die is to assess those things that were important to them. Who were they as a person? What were those important achievements? Who were those people who were important to them? And having them find some closure with those aspects of their life. I often tell people, because we have all these financial conversations, it is rare that someone at the end of their life tells me, I wish I made more money. It is rare that they say, I wish I spent more time at work. However, it is common for them to say, I wish I tried doing that thing that I was always so afraid to do, but held in port to me, right? So it's not the things we failed at even. It's the things we were too scared to put our heart and soul into, which people really regret. That's one. And then the other is relationships. It's those relationships we either too scared to make or that were broken that we never took the time to fix and mend. So those are the two big issues. And that's a lot of what we spend helping people deal with. And if we're lucky, sometimes we can help them get closure by giving them opportunities that they didn't have, or reconnecting them to someone, a relationship where they felt went wrong. The other side of that is sometimes we help them come to terms with those things are never going to come to closure. And that's okay, because human beings are messy. We have messy wants and needs and relationships. And sometimes you can't fix everything before you die.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because, in the hospice context, people, it sounds like they're either slowly dying or they're getting ready to die, but there's an awareness of often of what's happening. So there is that moment of reflection. There is that time to look back on one's life and come to terms and also surrender. A lot of people don't have that opportunity, dying so unexpectedly, very rapidly, very quick. It's something that's always fascinated me, this idea that the fragility of being, anything can kind of happen at any moment. And in reality, there's so little that we actually can control in our life relative to certainly being healthy, and all of these things, have an impact. But I'd love to hear what this work has done to your money mindset. Has it changed your relationship with money at all?
I think it's changed my relationship with a number of things. So first and foremost, what we talked about before is I certainly don't fear death the way I used to. I definitely see it more as a natural part of life. When it comes to money, I was always very achievement focused in how much money I made, what my net worth was, or what it could do for me. You start to realize when you work with people dying all the time that those achievements probably won't change the world. Like after I die, how much money I made, it's not going to matter to anyone. Let's say even that I did something amazing or created something amazing, it still will only affect maybe a small portion of people for a small period of time, and lifespan maybe 80 to 100 years, but after centuries and centuries, all of that kind of disappears. So it's made me think much more about being in the moment and seeing how I can bring myself that contentedness and then the people around me. So like, how can I affect the world in positive ways, not for how I'm going to create a legacy, but more how in the moment can I bring this sense of contentedness and happiness? So when you start doing that, you stop worrying so much about the numbers and the dollars and cents and how much, and you start thinking much more about, well, how can I use this power, this fuel I have from my economic and financial luck and savvy? How can I use all of that to make these moments count, right? Because we can make, you've said this to me many, many times, you can make an unlimited amount of money, but you have a set amount of time. So I concentrate a lot less on money. Like when I began this process of learning about finances and personal finance and financial independence, I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I invest? And I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I side hustle? I don't want to think about those things anymore. Like once I got my money to the point that I felt like it would support me, I want to spend much more time thinking about how can I live a good life that brings me a sense of happiness and contentedness. How can I be in the moment as things are happening? How can I make those lives of people around me better so that they can enjoy the moments too? And so I spend a lot more time thinking about that and a lot less time thinking about the details, because the details, once you get the broad swath of this is how I do it, that to me is a very solvable answer. On the other hand, how do I live a good life? How do I work on my own contentedness? How do I touch the people around me? That takes a lot more thought from me, and the answers aren't nearly as straightforward.
What are the answers? And I'm asking that in the context of, I remember a conversation we had that really stuck with me where I think it was earlier in the pandemic when we were chatting, and you were talking about you spend a lot of time with your kids, but you were wondering, am I making the most sort of these moments and of this time? And that really kind of stuck with me. Can you talk about some of the practices that you bring into the everyday moment to try to get the most of it?
Sure. I think there are a few big ones. Some of them are going to sound a little bit cliched, but I think that's because they're so good that we've all heard this before. But first and foremost, intention. I realized in my life, I'm going to screw things up over and over and over again. I'm going to go halfway. I'm not going to complete my promises. It's just human nature. So what I've decided first and foremost is to really center myself in the right intentions. So I found I'm a lot happier when I go about life with great intentions, and then I'm true to those, right? So, and that sometimes takes being brave, right? Sometimes you need to fess up to mistakes. Sometimes you need to take responsibility when things don't go well. But if you do what you do with the right intentions, if your heart behind your actions is right, most of the time things will work out. That's one, intention. Two, we've all heard this one before, gratitude. I think the more gratitude you have in life, the happier you will be and the better your relationships will be. And think about how many times where you're interacting with someone in your life and they're annoying you, right? They're doing something that they've done before and it annoys you. Like, how can you turn that around? Sometimes I question, I say, yeah, I'm really annoyed and I'm starting to get sharp with them. But look at all these really nice things they also do for me and the people around them. So I really try to center myself in gratitude because I think it just gives me a much more optimistic way of looking at the world. And last but not least, forgiveness. First of yourself. I've had to learn to forgive myself over and over and over again because I have an incredibly high standards. I am an overachiever. And for the first 30, 40 years of my life, I've set such high standards that no matter how often I met them, I would always fall short of the next one. And that sets you up to be fairly unhappy. And I'm not saying that having high standards isn't good. I'm not saying that achievements aren't good, but I've also decided to forgive myself for those things where I fell short and say that sometimes it's okay to settle for being mediocre and not push yourself to that next level. That sometimes pushing yourself to that next level doesn't make you happier. It just makes you more crazy. So forgiving yourself and then forgiving other people, because it's a long life we live, and God knows I've made enough mistakes and people have had to forgive me for them. So I've decided that I'm going to really try to forgive people. And I've been lucky enough that I've lived most of my life where I generally don't dislike anyone. I mostly dislike traits about people, but I've learned that if you can take some of that hate and anger out of yourself, life is a lot better. So those are the three, I think, guiding principles that help me kind of be centered, be in the moment. There are also a lot of habits that go along with that, like habits like meditation, habits like exercise. I've found, for instance, that occasionally, although I'm a fairly calm person, occasionally out of the blue, I will just get anxiety, right? So what do? I've started listening to classical music. Put on some classical music and just be. So there are some habits that go along with the mindset. And when you put the mindset and the habits together, I've found that it's really helped me feel a lot happier in life and certainly have a lot less stress and anxiety.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really beautiful. To me, it sounds like almost like a life practice that you're bringing into every moment. You've built what sounds like somewhat of a scientific, almost medical approach to living in the moment and being and feeling fully alive. You know, it's kind of like learning the scales of life, and then now you're playing the music. So it's so beautiful to hear, and thank you for sharing that. I think those tips are amazing. You know, one of the things that I've always admired about you is, since we've known each other, it seems like you've been spending a lot of time really doing what you love. And I know you've talked about you love podcasting, you love writing. What first attracted me to you was when I read your blog. And I don't know if you blog anymore, but I was so attracted to your writing style, these short, sort of reflective pieces, almost sort of meditations in a way. And I could tell that you were thinking deeply, and you were just the kind of guy that I wanted to get to know. It seems like you've now, in creating all of this content, you're doing what you love and you're happier than ever, no matter what kind of the outcome. And I'm saying that vis-a-vis, there's something in my own life where simply being truthful with myself and sharing my anxieties and just everything at the deepest level of my being has come back to me tenfold in terms of fulfillment and love and connection. And that was something I never could have imagined. You know, we always hide so much, but I tend to find the more that I share with everyone, the more vulnerable and open I am, the richer my life becomes. And I wonder if you could talk about your experience with that.
So I think a lot of this comes back to self-forgiveness. Something amazing happens when you forgive yourself. Like when you say, I am imperfect, and that's okay. And one of those things is you become very open to sharing those things that are important in you because you're like, I'm not perfect, and that's okay, but this is what's important to me. As I grew older, and I was really hard on myself as a kid. So my father died when I was 8, and certainly I carried this feeling that somehow I was responsible, right? I was 8 years old. 8-year-olds don't know anything. A caregiver leaves and you think it's your fault. And so I carried that with me for a few decades. And at some point, I realized that that was something that happened to me, not because of me. And that strange realization taught me a lot about self-forgiveness and a lot about self-acceptance. And once I was there, I realized that there was very little in this world, in a sense, that could hurt me because I could speak my truths, and I already fought that battle inside myself about being good enough, about making mistakes, about falling short. And once I came to terms with that part of myself, it just became really easy and open to, for instance, write these blog posts, which I was writing at one point every day, that were very authentically me. And I think that maybe one of the things you connected with is when you read a blog post of mine on Diversify, that was the essence of who I was, unabashedly and unashamedly. And that was something that really gave me power. I mean, talk about letting go of those things that bring you down and letting go of those things that cause you stress and anxiety. If you come to the conclusion that basically I'm a good person who means well, and that gives you permission to start expressing all those things inside of you that you find important, and that all of a sudden there are people there who can read it and can share that with you, it just promotes a good, healthy feeling about yourself and about life in general.
This episode is sponsored by Capital, a banking app that helps you create and automate successful money habits. Designed in collaboration with Professor Dan Ariely, the world's leading behavioral economist, Capital can help you reach your financial goals with smarter checking, savings, and investing tools. With over 70,000 five-star ratings in the App Store and on Google Play, over 2 million users, and over $1 billion saved, Capital is worth checking out if you want to take your money to the next level. I've used it and find it intuitive and a no-brainer if you want to maximize the amount of money you're saving automatically and easily. To sign up, go to millennialmoney.com/capital. That's QAPITAL, or go to capital.com or download straight from the App Store or Google Play. And don't forget to use the code GRANT to get $25 towards your first savings goal. You know, one of the things we often hear when we talk about death is, look forward 50, 60 years and what would you want people to be saying about you, or what, live for your obituary. You hear that often. I've spent a fair amount of time over the years reading obituaries. It tends to be someplace that I end up in the newspaper. I enjoy reading about people's lives, and a lot of obituaries, they tend to focus on those career accomplishments. Started this company, did this, did that. And of course, there's always the requisite, he or she loved their family and friends and connections. But I actually think it's a bad idea to live for your obituary. And the reason why is something that you alluded to, which is I think that the impact that we have as individuals on others and the world, we greatly underestimate. With every action and every choice and everything that we create and every conversation that we have and every word that we utter, we're rippling into the universe. And those ripples take on many, many forms that impact how other people think and live. And there's no way we can begin to understand the impact that we have in the world. And those obituaries, the greatest hits are not someone's life. That's one of the things that I love what you're doing just in terms of sharing everything that you know. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that feeling, because you have a podcast, you have listeners all over the world, you're creating all this content, but I know from my experience you hear from a very, 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 very small percentage of them, and so you often wonder, is anyone listening? Is this valuable to anyone? But in my sense, I can feel that energy. I can feel that sort of love. There's no question here. It's, do you feel that too? And do you realize the impact, that you've already had in my life, that you've already had in so many people's lives in the FIRE movement?
Yes and no. It's an interesting question. I started writing about medicine in about 2005, 2006, and I was writing a medical blog at the time. And that was the beginnings of me really putting myself out there into the world. At the time, I really pictured what I was doing as a soliloquy, right? I was taking all that I had inside me and putting it out in the world to see. And I don't know if I expected much back. Granted, we all hope, I put something out there and I get good feedback and people like it. But I don't know if my expectation was there. And as I've continued to produce content, I almost think that what I do, whether it be writing or a podcasting, it's an essential expression of who I am. And I don't know if I could exist without doing it. Like, if there wasn't the internet, I'd be writing it on paper. And if there wasn't paper, I'd be making up music and singing it, for crowds. I just think this is who I am. It is a happy side effect that it has brought into my life people like you who I feel strongly connected to and can have these amazing conversations. It is a happy side effect that maybe something I said helps someone in their life make an important decision or points them in the right direction when they were just at that point where they needed the right piece of advice. But I almost feel like this is something I have to do. And I'm happiest in life when I do it. There have been times when I haven't produced content. There have been times when I stopped writing. There have been times when I've stopped putting myself out there. And they've turned out to be the most miserable times in my life. And honestly, one of the ways I've always found a way out of being sad and depression is to start expressing myself again.
You mentioned legacy. What are your thoughts on legacy?
I've stopped thinking about what my legacy will be on the world, right? When you're young and you're thinking you're going to get out there, you're going to write the great American novel or produce the most famous podcast or somehow be cast on TV or write that article in the Wall Street Journal that's going to set everyone afire. So you have these big, big aspirations. There became a time in my life where I started to aspire much more towards locally making a difference, touching the people around me, making the small ripples in the pond that I figure eventually will spread to the whole ocean. So when I think of legacy, I now really think of how can I affect those people around me? And again, this comes a lot to my understanding of dying and what I've learned about that. I might be able to change the world that can affect people centuries and centuries from now, but I'm not going to be around to see that. And I may or may not succeed, but who knows? But I can damn well assure you that what I do today can affect the people next door to me. It can affect my spouse and my children. It can affect my friends. I can help someone do something locally and know immediately that I've changed the world for that person. So when I think of legacy, I think much more locally than I ever did before. Some of that might be just that I got older and I didn't have that big global impact. But I think some of it too is a realization that I can be in the here and now and make a difference today. And a lot of it really just depends on having the will and energy and intention to do it. How hard is it to change someone's life. I realized a while back that when I was busy and at work or crossing the street or doing things, I would often see someone fall or drop something, or I'd see a near car accident. And I can't tell you how many times I walked by, I said, oh, someone else will handle it. Someone else will do something. And then about 5 years ago, I said, I'm going to stop every single time. Every time I see someone drop something, I'm going to bend down, help them pick their things up, and ask if they're okay. If I see a near car accident and I can safely pull over, I'm going to pull over, even if there are 3 people there, and lend my assistance. Every time I see someone fall, I'm going to lend them a hand. And those little things that I just blew by in my life for all those decades bring me more happiness and connectedness than if I had written that great American novel, if I had created that thing that everyone wanted and had made me famous. So I've realized it's a lot easier in some ways than I made it out to be when I was younger. Like, you can change the world. You can have a big impact by being thoughtful and by not having fear and be willing to do those easy things that people, how many people need things like before COVID? How many people needed a hug or a hand on the shoulder and telling them it was okay? Like, how easy is that? It's not easy at all because we have these emotional and, intellectual barriers to doing it. But the truth of the matter is, once you let those down, it's easy. So I want that to be my legacy. I want to be the guy who was there, who made a difference on those people around him, who was willing to do whatever it took, who had all the best intentions. And that other stuff, if it's ever going to happen, will happen on its own.
You mentioned not being afraid of dying. What are you afraid of?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've always been afraid of letting people down. And that's something I've struggled with. I'm an achiever. And again, we're all affected by the strange things that happen to us, especially early in life. Having my dad die really made me feel like I wasn't good enough and that I had somehow let him down or my family down. And as irrational as that is, as irrational as the adult mind can go and look back and say that is, it has affected the way I've lived my life in good and bad ways. Like, my interest in achieving and not letting people down has helped me do amazing things. I mean, I made it through medical school. I became a doctor. I've achieved all these great things. But just like everything else in life, those things that spur you on and have a positive effect on your life can also have a negative effect. And so I've always been afraid of letting people down. And it's something that I constantly check myself on, right? Am I doing that because I want to do it? Or am I doing it because I feel like I'm going to let someone down? And parsing that out can be difficult.
One of the things I've talked a fair amount about on this podcast over the last couple of years is my fraught and complicated relationship with the personal development and self-help industry. There's so many books out there, massive, massive genre. So much that's being written about now is you need better habits. You need a better morning routine. You need to drink 2 liters of water. You need to meditate for 20 minutes a day. You need to habit stack. You need to cold shower. We live in this world where there's often, we feel like there's some secret or there's some prescription that we need to fulfill our greatest potential and make a lot of money and be successful and be healthy and have a really awesome life. I know that the work that I do is a part of that narrative. Save, invest, you can make money, you can have more freedom. But my tension around it is, in my heart, I believe that so much of the freedom that we seek, so many of the things that we seek are already within us. They already exist. We don't need to get better. We don't need to improve. We don't need to stress out about the fact that we missed 2 workouts this week, or our habits are failing, or, to me, the mistakes, the blemishes, the uncertainties, the messiness, that's where the beauty is. That's where the life sort of happens. And I had James Clear on my podcast, and we spent the whole episode not arguing, but disagreeing that habits are the pathway to freedom. He believes that you can build these habits in your life, which give you an immense opportunity. And my question for you now, overachiever, hyper-competitive, doctor, scientist, analytical, now I'd call you a monk, I'd call you a sage, I'd call you a philosopher. You've got the right brain, left brain here. What are we missing? What do you see? How do you lay the framework, or how can one cultivate a rich life?
So let me answer that in a roundabout way. I have this habit and pattern that I developed pretty early on in life, and then I never understood until much later. And the habit or pattern is that when I had something big coming up in life, I had a big speech to give, I had a big day where I had to perform, or, we all have those moments in life that really define who we're going to be and are we going to move forward or move backward. I do this funny thing before those moments. I generally sit down an hour or two before, and I either look at old photos or I do almost a mental categorization of all the things I've accomplished. And the reason why I do it, I realize, is not to give me confidence, is not to make sure that whatever I'm heading into, that I'm going to perform well. The reason I figured out I do this, it's like this way of saying, you are enough. What you've accomplished already is good enough. And no matter what happens today, it can't take away all those things that you are. So I've tried to negotiate life as an adult by starting with the first concept. You are enough. You're good enough. You have value. The things you've accomplished in life and who you've made yourself into is good. So then, when I start thinking about self-improvement, or I start thinking about all those things, I come at it as, you're good enough already, but maybe a little meditation will make you a little happier, or take away that anxiety you have, or help you do something you want to do. Maybe the cold shower will make you feel more invigorated in the morning. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So I look at self-help, and if you can steep it on that idea that first you're good enough, it becomes a playground for picking and choosing those things that then add extra value and benefit. And so I've been lucky enough, and I think my mom was the one who used to tell me, she's like, you're not enough already. She told me this constantly as a kid. It really stuck, and that helps negotiate all this, because ultimately, when you do self-improvement, you may have amazing success, or you might not at all. But the idea behind all of that is that it improves your life, not that it makes you feel guilty that you weren't able to live up to that standard that this book or this guru is selling you. So that's how I've tried to do it. So I don't think self-improvement is bad. I think it's only bad when you lose the ability to pick and choose that which actually improves your life. By getting too steeped in, if I don't get to this goal, I am not enough. If you start looking at self-improvement as an all or nothing, you either get there and you're enough and you're good enough and talented enough, or you don't get there and you're a failure. That's when it becomes a real unhappy proposition.
One of the things I believe is that we should all be preparing to die every day in some form, and using that. We talked about memento mori as a reflection on what it means to be alive, because we know how precious this moment is. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about very recently is just, even yesterday, the wildfires in California, the pandemic, the increasing sort of political and economic uncertainty of sort of late stage capitalism and around the world, and kind of the interconnected international economy. It's clear that we're moving into an increasingly uncertain age. And whether you believe in climate change or not, whatever, it's clear that things are getting real kind of crazy out there. And I'm not an alarmist by any means, but I happen to feel there's been such an increase in anxiety and depression and suicide and divorce and just malaise within the world in recent years. And I think because of the conditions, I think that's only going to likely increase as there's so much uncertainty. And I think that preparing to die, in a sense, whether it happens tomorrow or hopefully for everyone listening to this in 50 plus years, I think there's an acceptance that I'm working hard in my own life to accept sort of this embrace of what could be even the extinction of the planet. And I think there is a massive amount of collective grief and trauma and mourning that we're going through. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, is that something that worries you? Is that something that you see? And if so, is there a way that we can prepare ourselves in a way? What lessons can we learn from dying to feel at peace or maybe create peace in our life amidst this uncertainty?
So I love that question for a few reasons, because I think dying is the model for uncertainty, right? Because the big uncertainty in the world is your own death. And that's whenever we worry about uncertainty, what we're really worrying about is death. It's just an easier metaphor. So I have this saying about death. I like to say death is the period at the end of a sentence, not a parentheses or quotation marks. And so what do I mean by that? You're pretty much living till the moment you die. So I think the best way to prepare for death, the moment, is to live, is to really live well. Like, you can't change the moment, the day, whether you get COVID or a heart attack or cancer. You don't know whether it's going to be fast or slow. Hopefully it won't be painful, but you don't know what it's going to feel like. But you can control how you live today. And I think that translates well into the maelstrom of today's world. I can't control what's going to happen in our elections. I can't control what's going to happen in COVID. I certainly can use my experience and knowledge to try to add to the knowledge of the world. I mean, I can work on political campaigns. I can do all that. But mostly, all of this is out of my hands. So the end could be tomorrow or the next day or 10 years or 30 years. I can't really do much about that. But what I can do is live today's life in such a way that if it's tomorrow, I fulfilled my purpose. Like, I've been in the moment. I've touched the people around me. I've done those things that were important to me. Death is a moment. It's a period at the end of a sentence. Those bad things in your life that may happen aren't happening. They may happen. So what can you do in the meantime? And that's live. And that's be your best self and pursue those things that are important to you and touch those lives that matter and do the work that helps you grow inside. So that's my advice. Is like, yes, I think we should worry about these things. Yes, I think we should try to change the world when we can. But your best preparation is to do those things that are important to you now.
So when it comes to money, because I have to bring it back here, there's of two minds. YOLO, you're only here once, live in the moment, buy that thing that you want to buy. And then there's the other mindset of save and invest for an increasingly uncertain future, and maybe even going beyond that and leaving money to institutions or your kids. Or how do you balance those in your own life?
I don't tend to value material things as much as other people. I would venture to guess that when it really comes down to it, for most people, what truly brings happiness and contentedness is probably not things. It's experiences and people and good feelings inside. YOLO never made a lot of sense to me, at least when it came to buying things, because ultimately, I don't think those things will really make you happy. I mean, it's really cool to buy something great, but eventually that kind of the joy fades with most of those things. So I'm a big fan of long-term investing and being careful with your money, because it's time and experiences and, reflective time. All those things take money, because if you don't have money, you have to work and spend time working to have enough money to live. If you're careful with your finances, you free yourself up to have a lot more time to do that much more important stuff. So YOLO makes no sense to me, because it's a short-term sugar hit that won't keep you happy for very long. Whereas being measured and investing and paying attention to your finances is much more the long-term freeing up time so that you can then live your life the way you want to.
Well, Doc G, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today. You're a true bodhisattva. You're such a beautiful person. And I was on the verge of tears a few times during this episode. And I want to thank you because I can really feel your love and your energy this morning. And I know listeners will all over the world, and just even the ripple of this conversation will far beyond exceed our understanding and comprehension. So thanks for the work that you do. I feel grateful to call you a friend, and I look forward to all of the future conversations. And I love you, man. Appreciate you coming on.
I love you too. And the great part about this is we're sitting here in front of a camera and microphones, but we have these kind of conversations all the time. And that's actually part of the beauty and enjoyment of building this kind of life, is that kind of introspective look at life and then sharing it with someone else. It's a lot of fun, and I look forward to more conversations just like these.
So everyone check out the Earn and Invest podcast to learn more about Doc G. It's an incredible show, amazing format. Just trust me, subscribe, listen, download. Anywhere else people can find you?
That's the best place, earnandinvest.com. Or we have a Facebook group that discusses personal finance as well as life and philosophy. That is at facebook.com/groups/earnandinvest. I'd love to see you in either of those places. And we talk about this kind of stuff all the time.
And everyone listening, hope you're having a good day and making the most of the moment. And my heart goes out to all of you struggling during this time. And I feel grateful to be on this journey with you as well. Until next time, I'll see you soon. Thanks again, man.
No problem. Thank you.